Welcome to this presentation on research, innovation and evaluation and the framing of inquiry. We can think about health education as a field. There is no single theory, method or approach that is common to all aspects of the field. Indeed, it is a meeting point where many different kinds of concepts, practices, disciplines and perspectives are brought to bear. For instance, some individuals and some groups look at cognitivist issues. They look at brains, what happens inside people's brains, how they think. Others look at the social construction of medical education, how individuals work as part of groups and are functioning within cultures. Others consider the systems as a whole, such as the models of accreditation, assessment, and so on. And others may look at the philosophy or values that are inherent or expressed through medical education. All in all, our field is a practical and pragmatic one that has a particular focus on improving the training of physicians to improve health outcomes. Scholarship in our field can work at many different levels, ranging from individuals' learning and the way that individuals approach their learning through to whole medical education systems. It can also look at many different kinds of issues, such as what happens in medical education, how does medical education work, how can we improve aspects of medical education, how can we fix problems or areas that are problematic in medical education, and how do we respond to emerging challenges. There are many different values that are expressed through the field that range, for instance, from noetic issues such as things that are generalizable, looking for broad patterns and approaches and techniques and ideas that can work everywhere in medical education, to those things that are more idiographic, that are more context-specific, for instance, that just work in urban practices or Canadian practices. There are also many different philosophies, for instance, those that sit around measurement, explanation, prediction, generalism, and so on. There is much strength in this eclecticism in that we can tackle a very wide range of problems, and we don't have to select or choose one approach over any other. We can be very pragmatic in terms of selecting the kinds of techniques and approaches we need to answer the questions we face. But also there is a degree of conflict that comes from this, where there is no common agreed right way of doing everything. In terms of scholarship, we can, for instance, draw on Boyer's model of scholarship to look at the range of activities that may be considered scholarly. He identified 4 types, ranging from discovery, which is about doing research, or innovation, creating new things, new knowledge. He talked about scholarship of integration, which is about synthesizing knowledge from elsewhere, bringing things in from other domains. He talked about the scholarship of application, which is looking at the effectiveness of different types of techniques and approaches within education, or indeed any kind of scholarship. And he looked specifically at the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is about not just about being a teacher or being a learner, but engaging in systematic evaluation and exploration about quality improving, developing, and working at a higher level to push the boundaries of teaching and learning. In terms of quality in scholarship, we might think, for instance, based on something like this definition from the Canadian Association for Medical Education, that quality in educational scholarship is reflected in work that is peer-reviewed and publicly disseminated, and that provides a platform that others can build on. I tend to use Glassic's criteria for structured inquiry in scholarship, which state that all scholarship needs to have clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, significant results, effective presentation, and engage in reflective critique. In terms of then what we think inquiry involves, well, it is about developing knowledge or understanding in a focused and structured way. It's about organizing the knowledge that we acquire or that we find. That it's about engaging in systematic inquiry, that we are engaged in a model of inquiry that is not just random, but is actually pursuing something in a systematic way. It involves exploration through forms of experimentation, developing testable and predictive models. But in doing so, we consider many ways to structure inquiry, and many of these depend on our assumptions about reality and knowledge. And we can take, for instance, this model, the metrics model, as an approach to inquiry. These are 7 different distinct approaches to engaging in inquiry. Meta-scholarship is about scholarship that looks at scholarship. So, for instance, how does research or innovation, all these other kinds of things work? How do we understand them? How do we express them? And bibliometric research, for instance, would fit into this. Evaluation research is about, or evaluation inquiry or evaluation scholarship is about engaging in acts that look at value, how well we are doing something, whether something is good or bad, or better or worse. Translation inquiry or translation scholarship is about bringing things from elsewhere, or taking things from one type of application and seeing if and how they can work in another. And in doing so, there is a degree not just of moving, but also translating in terms of reinterpreting something so that it can work or can work more effectively in a new context or setting. Research, which is probably the core and most commonly considered aspect of a scholarly inquiry, is about the creation of knowledge through either the creation of theory or the testing of theory and or hypotheses. Innovation is about creating new things. It's about either responding to an opportunity, responding to an idea, or responding to a need, but developing and advancing the field through innovation, through creating new things. Conceptual inquiry is about considering the concepts that we work with, the philosophies, the frames, the approaches, the contrasting ways we approach the way that we think about medical education scholarship. And synthesis is about drawing things together from multiple sources. So, for instance, systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which draw upon existing literature in the field. It is always helpful to think about the ontology and epistemology of what we're doing. Ontology is concerned with the study of being, what exists, what's real, and what kinds of things have in common, what kinds of things they are. Epistemology, on the hand, is about the study of knowledge, truth and belief. And it's about considering how we know things and how do we express that knowledge, indeed how do we even pursue that knowledge. And so, for instance, we might differentiate between knowing how a car works and knowing how to drive a car against knowing how to build a car. Both, or three in fact, are to do with cars, with vehicles, but they are very different kinds of knowledge about operating a car, about explaining its underlying physical properties, and about the practical ways of building or maintaining one. And indeed, we can think about, for instance, the difference between whether something exists as an ontological problem and whether and how we can understand its existence as an epistemological question. And both of these are required in forms of structured inquiry. As an example, the ontological question, does such a thing, the phenomenon I'm interested in, really exist? What kind of thing is it? What other things is it like? And can I treat this thing as if it were similar to other things? Are all ontological questions. So, for instance, if I'm doing research or some kind of inquiry into competence, to ask whether competence is a real thing and what kind of thing is it, is to ask an ontological question. On the other hand, if we were to say what kinds of knowledge do we already have about something, such as competence, and what kind of knowledges do we need and how we will gather that knowledge, then those are epistemological questions. So, for instance, what do we know about competence? What kinds of knowledge do we need to advance competence, such as how well we can measure it, or is it expressed in different ways in different individuals or in different contexts? And then thinking about, well, what kind of knowledge would help us to advance this? So it'd be about, for instance, understanding how individuals experience competence, or the commonality that they share in those expressions of competence. All of these have implications for theory and method. Now, a theory is a set of interrelated constructs, definitions and propositions that presents a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relations amongst variables with the purpose of explaining and predicting the phenomena. Theory must be testable, and they should be able to be confirmed or rejected consistently. And in the sense that we are always trying to disconfirm, to reject a theory by testing it, then we also understand theories as being provisional, that they are trajectories towards truth, but may not themselves ever reach the state of absolute truth. And in thinking about theory, we should also be clear that there are two intersecting bodies of theory. They're the theories of the phenomena that we're looking at. So they might be theories of competence, or theories of assessment, or theories of the hidden curriculum, and so on. And there are also theories of inquiry. This is to do with how we understand the methods we use to explore, to conduct acts of inquiry. So there might be a theory of asking questions, a theory of analysing evidence, a theory of the kinds of questions or the kinds of evidence we even need to acquire in the first place, and so on. Now, all of this sits within a broad process of empiricism. And empiricism is about the use of the senses to engage with the world. And it is intrinsically inductive in the sense that it works from experience and can be seen broadly in terms of a progression from that experience to being able to classify the kinds of experience you have, which is to say, this seems to be this kind of thing or that kind of thing. We can start to quantify and describe it. We can then look at relationships within those components, which then allows us to start creating these theories which are approximations to truth. And indeed, we can think about really the science moving forward, inquiry moving forward, not through faith or utility or logic, or even necessarily directly accessing truth, but through engaging in active empiricism, through engaging through what we see in our senses, what we experience, and being able to systematically test and develop that to build theory. Now, theory and empiricism work with each other. Theory without experience is empty, but experience without theory is blind, said Immanuel Kant. Theory should guide our approach to empiricism. How we engage in empirical acts should be guided by theory. And it should also explain our empirical findings. Empiricism should generate theory, so that theory and empiricism go backwards and forwards with each other as they move tangentially towards more accurate and more representative models of reality. So in summary for this presentation, we've looked at scholarship as a way of setting standards for working in and around health professions education. We've considered different dimensions of scholarship and different kinds of approaches. And the purpose of this presentation and others that are associated with it is that to get across the idea that with training anyone can adopt a scholarly stance. And indeed, inquiry is central to scholarship. We've looked at ontology in terms of what exists and what things are like. We've considered epistemology, what we know about things and how we know that. We've considered theory as a series of propositions about how the world works. We've considered the process of empiricism as about testing or generating knowledge based on real-world experience. We've considered how theory and empiricism are a necessary dyad, that one feeds into the other. And we've considered, at least briefly, that there are different kinds of paradigms of inquiry.